hang on. I think we're on video. We're still on video, don't worry. We can get everyone in. Cheer up, Jerry, we're on holiday.
May 3rd, 2007, a quiet resort town in Portugal. 3 sleeping children, parents dining just yards away. They checked every 20 minutes, until one check changed everything. At 9:05 p.m., Madeleine McCann was safe in bed. By 10 p.m., she was gone. No screams, no struggle, just an open window and an empty bed. 18 years later, the world still asks the same question: how does a child vanish without a trace in a place surrounded by people, light, and routine? Was it a kidnapping, an accident, or something far more disturbing? And in the middle of it all, one question that still demands an answer: where is Madeleine? Before tracing the timeline and examining the suspects, there remains one lingering shadow that refuses to fade. One that threads through every forensic report, every investigative misstep, and every hushed conversation about this case.
I am damn sure that Madeleine McCann was not abducted.
Wow, what do you think happened then?
I tend to agree with the Portuguese police.
Did you kill your daughter?
No, that's an emphatic no. I mean, the ludicrous thing is what's been purported from Portugal is that Madeleine died in the apartment by an accident and we hid her body. Well, when did she have the accident and died? Because the only time she was left unattended was when we were at dinner. So if she died then, how could we have disposed or hidden her body, when there was an immediate threat? It's just nonsense. So, and if she died when we were in the apartment or fell and did something, why would we cover that up?
It is a question more unsettling than any other. Did something happen inside apartment 5EA that involved more than an unknown intruder? More specifically, how much do we truly know about the McCann's actions on the night Madeleine vanished? Several details, often buried beneath media headlines and official statements, raise disturbing questions. The cadaver dog, trained to detect the scent of human decomposition, alerted strongly to Madeleine's beloved toy, Cuddle Cat. Yet, oddly, the same dog gave no alert on the bed where she was said to have been sleeping. Forensic experts note that cadaver scent requires at least 60 minutes post-mortem for fluids to seep into objects. Jerry McCann stated he last saw Madeleine alive at 9:05 p.m. Kate McCann discovered her missing at 10:00 p.m. That leaves less than an hour. How then could a toy absorb cadaver scent while the bed remained untouched? Adding to this mystery is Kate McCann's immediate decision to wash the toy after learning police wanted it for DNA analysis. Was it a maternal act of grief, or a deliberate move to erase evidence? No answer has ever been fully provided. Then there is their emotional conduct. Unlike other high-profile cases involving missing children, where parents exhibit unrestrained grief, the McCann's demeanor was consistently composed, even controlled. In interviews, their focus often seemed to shift from finding their daughter to their personal suffering, portraying themselves as victims of media pressure and suspicion. Was this simply their way of coping, or was it a quiet redirection? Even more unsettling is the speculation that Madeleine may have never been placed in bed that night at all. If that theory holds any truth, it challenges the very timeline the McCanns provided. Could her death have occurred earlier in the evening, before the now infamous dinner checks began? Beyond emotional responses and timelines, another question haunts the case. How did this tragedy evolve into a massive fundraising operation, drawing millions in donations, sustaining media campaigns, and funding legal battles, while fundamental forensic inconsistencies remain unresolved? And finally, was it merely bad luck that so many investigative blunders happened at once? Or did convenience play a role in the immediate contamination of the crime scene, facilitated by friends and resort staff, moving freely inside the apartment, erasing potential evidence forever? These questions are not accusations. They are simply the persistent shadows left behind, uncomfortable, unresolved, and undeniable. They represent the silent undercurrent of this case, the part that no timeline, suspect list, or media campaign has ever fully addressed. And until they are answered, the story of Madeleine McCann will remain incomplete. Now, let's step into the facts of the case, the timeline, the suspects, and the void that still dominates. 18 years. That's how long it's been since Madeleine McCann vanished from her family's holiday apartment in Portugal. And yet, despite global media coverage, multiple international investigations, and more than £13 million in public funding, the world still doesn't know what happened to her. In June 2025, a new search renewed public interest. German authorities, believing they had concrete evidence against a long-time suspect, Christian Bruckner, requested Portuguese police to excavate an overgrown rural site near Praia da Luz. The search lasted 3 days. They found bone fragments, torn fabric, a sealed plastic bag buried beneath a slab of stone, and still no confirmation, no match, no charges, just more waiting. Bruckner, a convicted sex offender with a known history of child abuse and violence, had lived in the area around the time of Madeleine's disappearance. Investigators had previously uncovered thousands of child abuse images hidden beneath the corpse of his dog. He also made a suspicious phone call near the resort on the exact night Madeleine vanished. And yet, after years of digging, literally and legally, Bruckner has never been charged in connection to Madeleine's case. He remains imprisoned for other crimes, but unless prosecutors act soon, he may walk free by 2026. For many, the urgency is palpable. German investigators insist they have crucial information, but not enough admissible proof. Scotland Yard's Operation Grange continues to operate with reduced resources. Portuguese police, after reopening the case in 2013, have said little since. The case sits in a strange limbo, technically active, practically frozen. And through it all, one place remains at the center of every theory, every timeline, and every lingering doubt: apartment 5A. It was small, unguarded, and unlocked. A child lay sleeping just a few feet from a public walkway. No security cameras, no alarm, no forced entry, no screaming, just an empty bed, an open window, and a family whose lives were shattered in a single hour. Was it a kidnapping, carefully planned and cleanly executed? A break-in that went horribly wrong? A tragic accident that someone tried to cover up? Or is the truth something else entirely? Something no one has dared to admit? What really happened inside apartment 5A? To answer that, we have to step back from the evidence and look at the people involved. Who were the McCanns before the cameras and suspicions? What routines did they follow on that vacation? Who was watching them? And what small choices did they make that would later be scrutinized by the world? Before the disappearance became an international scandal, it was just a family holiday. Just parents, children, friends. And in that normality, somewhere, the seeds of tragedy were planted. Let's go back to the beginning. Before the headlines, before the televised press conferences, before the search dogs, the media frenzy, and the whispered doubts, there was just a family. The McCanns, by all accounts, were ordinary, respectable. British. They lived in Rothley, a quiet, middle-class town in Leicestershire, England. Jerry McCann, a soft-spoken cardiologist, worked at Glenfield Hospital. Kate McCann, his wife, had trained as a general practitioner. They were both medical professionals, educated, focused, and seemingly grounded. There was nothing unusual about them. Nothing that stood out, and that's what made what came next all the more incomprehensible. For years, they had tried to have children. Their path to parenthood was filled with heartbreak and uncertainty. Fertility issues led them to IVF, a physically and emotionally taxing journey. But in 2003, it finally happened. A baby girl, born healthy. They named her Madeleine Beth McCann. She had bright blue eyes, soft blonde hair, and a small brown fleck in her right eye that made her instantly recognizable. To Kate and Jerry, she wasn't just a child. She was a miracle. Their miracle. The daughter they believed they might never have. Madeleine was the kind of child who left an impression. Curious, bright, affectionate, she was protective of her younger siblings and had a natural warmth that drew people in. Kate often described her as thoughtful beyond her years. In 2005, the McCann's family grew again, this time with twins, Sean and Emily. At just 18 months old, they were still toddlers in May 2007. Madeleine, the oldest, had just turned 3. The family dynamic was full of energy and innocence, the kind of joy that made people smile when they passed by in the park or on holiday. Late April 2007, the McCanns traveled to Portugal for a much-needed vacation. Their destination was Praia da Luz, a picturesque coastal town in the Algarve region. Sun-washed streets, white villas, and quiet beaches. It was marketed as a family-friendly resort area, a haven for tourists. The McCanns stayed at the Ocean Club, a modest complex of rental apartments surrounded by gardens and pools. They weren't alone. 7 of their close friends, along with their own children, had joined them. 9 adults in total, and 8 children. This group would later be dubbed by the press as the Tapas 7. Each family had their own apartment within the same block. The McCanns stayed in apartment 5A, a ground, floor corner unit that opened onto a small pedestrian street on one side and a garden path on the other. Their unit had 2 bedrooms, a living area, and a small kitchen. It was practical, comfortable, and positioned conveniently for the routine the adults quickly fell into. Every night, after putting their children to bed, the adults would gather at the resort's tapas restaurant, located roughly 55 meters away, just under 60 seconds walk from the McCann's apartment. From the restaurant terrace, however, they couldn't see the units. That distance would become one of the most discussed measurements in the case. Still, the group believed the risk was minimal. They devised a rotation. Each parent would take turns leaving dinner every 20 to 30 minutes to check on their sleeping children. It wasn't ideal, but it was consistent. They had done this for several nights without incident. The McCanns typically used the back patio door to enter and exit the apartment. That door faced a garden walkway and was left unlocked, intentionally, for easier access during the dinner checks. The front door, which opened onto the narrow Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva, remained locked. The layout seemed manageable. The system worked. Until the night it didn't. Thursday, May 3, 2007, began like every other day on their trip. The families swam, played tennis, had breakfast together. Madeleine had gone to the kids' club earlier that morning, excited to see her friends. There was no sign of anything wrong. No unusual behavior. Nothing that hinted at what was to come. That evening, the children were put to bed as usual around 7:30 to 8 p.m. Madeleine was dressed in pale pink and white Eeyore pajamas. The twins were placed in cots beside her. The nightlight was off, something investigators would later question. The patio door was left ajar. It was warm, quiet. At 8:30 p.m., the adults met for dinner at the tapas restaurant. The McCanns were among the last to arrive. Around 9:05 p.m., Jerry got up to do his check. He walked back to the apartment, entered through the patio door, and found all 3 children asleep. He lingered only briefly before heading back to the restaurant. On his way, he stopped to chat with a fellow resort guest, Jez Wilkins, just outside apartment 5A. They talked for a few minutes, standing mere steps away from what may have been a pivotal moment in the case. Roughly 10 minutes later, Jane Tanner, one of the Tapas 7, got up to check on her own daughter. As she passed apartment 5A, she noticed a man walking away from the complex, carrying a small child. The child had no shoes. She wore light, colored pajamas. Jane thought little of it at the time. Maybe it was just a father carrying his sleeping daughter. But what if it wasn't? At around 9:30 p.m., another friend, Matthew Oldfield, offered to check on the McCann's children during his own round. He entered the apartment, listened for any noise, saw light through the door, and heard the twins breathing, but crucially, he didn't look directly at Madeleine's bed. Then came 10 p.m. Kate McCann's turn to check. She entered through the patio door and walked into the children's room. The window was wide open. The curtain fluttered, and Madeleine's bed was empty. What happened in the next few moments was chaos. Kate ran back to the restaurant, screaming, "They've taken her! Someone's taken Madeleine!" Friends and staff began searching the area. Flashlights cut through the dark, names were shouted. But there was no answer. No trace, no sound. Later, investigators would learn of something Madeleine had said just the day before. A simple sentence. But it would take on a chilling weight in hindsight. She had asked her mother, "Why didn't you come when Sean and I cried last night?" No one knew then how ominous those words might be, whether they were a child's innocent question or a signal missed too late. In the end, the McCanns were just a family trying to enjoy a vacation, doing what so many others do, trusting the safety of a routine, trusting that nothing bad could happen just 55 meters away. But in apartment 5A, sometime between 9:05 and 10 p.m., the unthinkable did, and what followed would become one of the most haunting mysteries of the 21st century. The first 48 hours in any missing child case are crucial. They are the golden window, where memories are sharp, evidence is fresh, and leads can still be chased before they vanish. But in the case of Madeleine McCann, those hours weren't just lost, they were squandered, and the consequences have haunted the investigation ever since. When Kate McCann discovered that her daughter was missing at exactly 10 p.m. on May 3, 2007, panic erupted. She ran back to the tapas restaurant shouting, "They've taken her." Friends, resort staff, and other tourists immediately began searching. But what followed wasn't a coordinated emergency response. It was chaos. Instead of securing apartment 5A as a potential crime scene, dozens of people moved in and out freely. They opened doors, touched windows, stepped on floors, comforted the twins, rearranged items, even sat on the furniture. Everyone had good intentions. They were trying to help. But they were unknowingly destroying what little evidence may have existed. The bedroom, where Madeleine had slept, became contaminated within minutes. The front door, the window, the curtains, every surface a potential clue, now compromised. It took the local police, the Polizia Giudiziaria, nearly 30 to 40 minutes to arrive after being called. When they did, there was no clear procedure. No perimeter was sealed. No forensic team was immediately dispatched. No list was made of everyone who had entered the apartment. Even basic investigative protocols, like preserving footprints, dusting for prints, or logging items, were ignored or delayed. The crime scene wasn't treated like a crime scene. It was treated like a domestic accident. In the days that followed, more opportunities were lost. Local officers lacked experience in handling high-profile abduction cases, and language barriers with British witnesses only made things harder. Witness statements were taken without translators, leading to errors and inconsistencies. No door-to-door canvass of nearby buildings was properly conducted that night. No roadblocks, no airport alerts, no early Amber Alert system, because Portugal didn't have one. When British sniffer dogs were finally brought in weeks later, they added a new, chilling layer of confusion. One dog, trained to detect the scent of a human corpse, alerted behind the living room sofa in the McCann's apartment, and again in the trunk of the rental car the family had hired weeks after Madeleine disappeared. Another dog, trained to detect traces of blood, responded in the same spots. These reactions raised serious questions and dark suspicions. Forensic samples were taken and sent for DNA analysis, but by then, it was too late. The samples had degraded. What was left was a mixed DNA profile, possibly from multiple people. Nothing definitive. Nothing that could hold up in court. The media jumped on it, spinning a narrative that pointed back at the parents. The dog's alerts were treated as near proof. But the science said otherwise. Cadaver dogs are powerful tools, but not evidence by themselves. Without conclusive DNA, the entire theory remained speculative. Then came the sighting. Around 9:15 p.m., Jane Tanner, one of the McCann's dinner companions, claimed she saw a man walking away from apartment 5A carrying a child in pink pajamas. The child matched Madeleine's description. The man, she said, was medium, build, wore light, colored trousers and a dark jacket, and walked casually across the road, disappearing into the night. Tanner didn't recognize him. She assumed, in that moment, it was a father carrying his child to bed. But this simple observation became one of the most controversial pieces of evidence in the case. At the same time Jane passed the apartment, Jerry McCann was standing just outside, talking with another resort guest, Jez Wilkins. Neither man saw Jane. Neither saw the man she described. How could three adults stand within feet of each other, yet one sees a stranger with a child, and the other two see nothing? Over time, Jane's account evolved. Details shifted. The direction the man walked, the position of the child, even the outfit changed slightly with each telling. Years later, during a televised Crime Watch reconstruction, investigators concluded that the man Jane saw may have been an innocent British tourist, picking up his own daughter from a nearby Crawshee. But by then, the image of the Tanner sighting had become iconic, even as its credibility unraveled. And while the world debated dogs and sightings, something worse was happening behind the scenes. The investigation began turning inward. Portuguese authorities, under pressure to produce results, began to suspect the parents. Kate and Jerry McCann were named Arguidos, official suspects, in September 2007, 4 months after their daughter vanished. The reasons? Circumstantial at best. The dog's alerts. The family's rented car. Their calm demeanor in media interviews. Critics said they weren't grieving enough. Others pointed to their decision to leave young children alone while dining, calling it negligent, even criminal. Public opinion split sharply. The focus on the parents soon consumed the investigation, but this tunnel vision came at a price. By zeroing in on Kate and Jerry, detectives deprioritized other leads. Reports of strange men seen near the resort days before Madeleine disappeared were filed away. Witnesses who claimed to have seen suspicious vehicles were never properly followed up. Resort staff, temporary workers, and local contractors were not cross-referenced with international criminal databases. Surveillance opportunities, already limited, were not investigated. And most critically, no digital records were pulled from cell towers in the first 72 hours. Today, we'd have metadata, text logs, GPS pings. In 2007, that window closed almost as soon as it opened. Compounding the failure was the lack of surveillance infrastructure. The Ocean Club Resort had no security cameras at the apartment entrances. No CCTV near the garden pathway or alley where a suspect might have escaped. The streets of Praia da Luz were calm, unmonitored, and dark, and the apartment where Madeleine slept was ground floor, with easy access from multiple angles. It was both perfectly ordinary and horrifyingly vulnerable. In hindsight, the damage was irreversible. The contaminated crime scene, the missed leads, the diverted attention, the public trial of two grieving parents, all of it pulled the investigation further from what mattered most: finding Madeleine. By the time international coordination improved, years later, the trail had gone cold. Files had been lost. Witnesses had moved on, and crucially, no suspect, then or now, has ever been definitively linked to the crime. What happened in apartment 5A that night may never be fully known. But what happened afterward, the mishandling, the missteps, and the misjudgments, is part of the story that must be told. Because sometimes, justice isn't only denied by evil, it's delayed by error. And in the case of Madeleine McCann, the silence of the night was only matched by the silence of lost opportunity. What if Madeleine McCann wasn't the target? Among the theories that have emerged over the past 18 years, the idea of a botched burglary stands out not because it is sensational, but because it is brutally simple. It suggests that the disappearance of Madeleine wasn't the result of a carefully orchestrated kidnapping or a deep-seated personal vendetta, but rather a random break in that spiraled out of control. A crime of opportunity, not intention. To understand this possibility, we need to revisit Praia da Luz in the mid-2000s. The quiet Portuguese resort town was popular with tourists, particularly families from the UK. But beneath the postcard, perfect image was a more troubling pattern, one that never made it into the travel brochures. In the months and years leading up to Madeleine's disappearance, the area had seen a noticeable spike in petty theft and nighttime burglaries, especially during the spring and summer holiday seasons. At least a dozen reported break-ins occurred in and around the Ocean Club between 2006 and 2007, Many of these took place while guests were asleep. Often, there were no signs of forced entry, just open windows, unlocked patio doors, and valuables gone by morning. The McCann's apartment, Unit 5A, was a ground, floor corner unit with a sliding patio door that faced a garden walkway. On the night of May 3, 2007, that door was left unlocked. Not because of negligence, but because the parents were following a routine. Each night, the Tapas 7 dined at the resort's nearby restaurant, taking turns checking on their children every 20 to 30 minutes. For ease of access, they chose to leave the back entrance open. They had done this for several nights without issue, until the night it all changed. Under the burglary theory, someone, perhaps a local petty criminal or two, was walking through the resort area late at night, looking for an easy target. They spotted the darkened apartment, saw the unlatched patio door, and made their way in. Their intention was simple: grab a wallet, a camera, maybe a few electronics, and leave without anyone knowing. But what they didn't expect was Madeleine. It's possible the child stirred. Perhaps she sat up in bed. Perhaps she spoke. In that split second, the intruder faced a choice: leave and risk being identified later, or silence the threat. The theory suggests that Madeleine may have been taken not as a planned abduction, but as a reaction to a threat of exposure. It wasn't a predator stalking prey. It was a thief who panicked when the crime took a turn. Critics of this theory point out an obvious flaw: nothing was stolen. No items were missing from the apartment. No cash, no phones, no passports. Isn't that inconsistent with a robbery? But panic can be a powerful disruptor of logic. If the thief believed they had just been seen by a child, one whose description could lead to arrest, they may have fled immediately. Worse, if they believed the child had to be silenced, the situation could have escalated into something far more tragic than a burglary. And here's where the theory grows darker. British cadaver dogs, brought in weeks later, alerted to the scent of a corpse behind the living room sofa in the McCann's apartment, and again in the trunk of the family's rental car. Hired nearly 3 weeks after Madeleine's disappearance. A second dog, trained to detect traces of blood, also reacted in the same locations. These alerts led some investigators to believe that Madeleine may have died inside the apartment, perhaps from a blow or fall during a struggle. Under the botched burglary scenario, this suggests an accidental death. Madeleine could have been struck, intentionally or not, during the chaos of the intrusion. The perpetrator, realizing the enormity of what had happened, may have then removed her body to avoid detection. The scent detected by the dogs could be the tragic trace of a life lost in that moment of fear and confusion. But again, the forensic evidence fell short. DNA samples collected from those areas were too mixed and degraded to provide any definitive match. No blood spatter, no fingerprints, no hair fibers linked to an outsider. Nothing that could tie a specific individual to the scene. By the time these forensic tests were conducted, the apartment had been heavily contaminated by dozens of people moving through it on the night of Madeleine's disappearance. The opportunity for clean, uncontaminated evidence was long gone. Still, there are supporting details that lend the theory weight. Operation Grange, the British, led review and investigation into the case, took this possibility seriously. Detectives found that several of the previous burglaries near the Ocean Club had disturbing similarities. In one instance, an intruder entered an apartment while a child was sleeping in the same room. In others, perpetrators escaped quietly through unlocked doors while families slept. The behavior pattern was known, and in Madeleine's case, the access point, the unlocked patio door, fit the profile. Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood, who led Operation Grange in its early years, even stated in a 2013 BBC interview that they were looking at the case as a criminal act gone wrong. The implication was clear: the child may not have been the focus. But once she woke up, she became the problem. In 2014, based on this line of investigation, British police conducted excavations in wasteland near Praia da Luz, suspecting that a panicked perpetrator may have hidden a body nearby. No remains were found, But the scale and seriousness of the operation made it clear that the burglary theory had moved beyond speculation. It had become a legitimate investigative path. Yet despite all this, there are questions that still challenge the theory's foundation. How did the intruder leave without waking the twins, or alerting neighbors? Why take Madeleine at all, if escape was still possible without violence? And how has no one, no local thief, no low-level criminal, ever confessed, even under pressure or reduced sentence offers? The burglary theory may lack the drama of international trafficking rings or serial predators. But in its simplicity lies a disturbing plausibility. Crimes escalate when something goes wrong. Panic drives irrational decisions. And sometimes, it only takes a few seconds of confusion to turn a minor offense into a permanent tragedy. What happened inside apartment 5A may not have been planned. It may not have been personal. It may have been a random, horrifying accident. But even if it was, the result is the same: a child gone, a family shattered, and a silence that still offers no answers. Not every tragedy is born from evil. Sometimes, it's the result of confusion, fear, and one terrible mistake. In the case of Madeleine McCann, a theory that has lingered quietly in the background for years offers a far less sinister, but no less devastating possibility. What if she wasn't abducted at all? What if Madeleine simply woke up, wandered out of her apartment looking for her parents, and was struck by a car? This is the heart of the drunk driver theory, a scenario that avoids conspiracy, avoids predators, avoids international trafficking rings. It leans on something tragically human: a frightened child, a poorly lit street, and a driver who made the worst possible decision in a moment of panic. Madeleine McCann was 3 years old when she vanished. Old enough to understand the absence of her parents. Old enough to try and find them. Her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, were dining with friends at the Ocean Club's tapas restaurant, just a minute's walk away, about 55 meters from their apartment. They left the sliding patio door unlocked, intending to check on the children every 20 to 30 minutes, a routine they had followed throughout their vacation. But what if, during one of those intervals, Madeleine awoke? Perhaps she realized she was alone. Perhaps she remembered the night before, when, according to her mother, she and her brother Sean had cried, and no one came. It's not hard to imagine a small child deciding to get out of bed, walk out the door, and look for her parents. If that happened, Madeleine would have exited into the narrow pedestrian walkway behind apartment 5A, then turned toward the street. The surrounding roads were dimly lit, and at that time of night, just past 9:30 p.m., few people were outside. There were no security cameras, no automatic street surveillance, no patrols. Praia da Luz in 2007 was not equipped with the kind of infrastructure that might have captured such a moment. Now imagine a local driver, perhaps a resort worker, perhaps a tourist, under the influence, driving too fast, not expecting a child to be on the road, a flash of pink in the headlights, no time to react, a thud, a body. What happens next is what turns an accident into a cover-up. Instead of calling the police, the driver panics. Maybe they've been drinking. Maybe they don't have a license. Maybe they're already on probation. Whatever the reason, the instinct is to flee. They scoop up the child, hide the body in the trunk, and drive off into the darkness. In this version of events, Madeleine wasn't targeted. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and then vanished not by abduction, but by avoidance. The most compelling element of this theory is the silence it leaves behind. There were no screams that night, no reports of a struggle, no broken glass, no signs of forced entry. Madeleine's bed looked almost undisturbed. Her favorite stuffed animal was still there. Her siblings slept through the entire incident. If she had simply walked out, no one would have known, until it was too late. Supporters of the drunk driver theory point to the eerie lack of physical evidence as a kind of negative proof. No blood, no signs of violence, no definitive DNA traces, no forced doors or broken locks, no suspicious vehicles recorded entering or leaving the resort. But that's exactly what would happen if a body was removed quickly and quietly, before any search began. In fact, The first real police response didn't occur until nearly an hour after Madeleine was reported missing. That gave any potential perpetrator plenty of time to disappear. Critics, of course, raise fair points. For one, there were no reports of a vehicle accident that night. No witnesses claimed to hear a crash. There were no dented guardrails or tire marks. No unusual damage was noticed on any vehicles in the area. If such an accident occurred, it left no trace. Then again, silence works both ways. The streets were quiet. The town was small. If the accident happened on a side road with no one around, and the driver took immediate steps to hide their tracks, who would know? Who would hear? Another question: could a 3-year-old really navigate the apartment, unlock the patio door, and wander outside without waking the twins? Without triggering any attention from passersby? Some say yes. Children are unpredictable. Madeleine had been known to get up in the night. The patio door was left unlocked. The path to the street was unobstructed. It's not impossible. But the biggest challenge to this theory is the absence of a confession. If this were a simple accident, no malice, just fear, why hasn't anyone come forward in 18 years? Even anonymously. Even on their deathbed. The answer might lie in culture and timing. In small communities, particularly in Southern Europe, it's not uncommon for people to avoid reporting crimes, especially those involving alcohol, vehicles, or accidental harm. A local driver may have feared legal consequences, deportation, or community backlash. And over time, the silence becomes permanent. Moreover, once the focus of the investigation turned toward abduction, toward foreign predators and organized crime, local theories like this one were deprioritized. Portuguese police didn't conduct mass vehicle inspections. They didn't canvass for drunk drivers. No roads were examined for impact evidence. The moment passed. The opportunity to confirm or rule out. This theory was lost in the very first days. Even former Portuguese investigator Gonçalo Amaral, who led the early stages of the case, vaguely floated the idea of accidental death, but never publicly pursued the hit-and-run angle. It was simply not the narrative authorities wanted to follow, especially under intense international pressure. Today, the drunk driver theory remains speculative. There is no vehicle, no suspect, no eyewitness, no proof. But what it does offer is a sobering alternative to the darker theories. It strips away monsters and replaces them with something harder to accept: the idea that a small mistake, followed by a selfish decision, could erase a child from the world. It's a theory built more on what isn't than what is. No screams, no camera footage, no answers, only absence. And in a case defined by silence, sometimes absence is all. Some crimes are impulsive, others are calculated. Some are the result of panic, others of precision. But few theories in the case of Madeleine McCann carry the weight of cold, premeditated malice the way the predator theory does. And at the center of this possibility stands one name. A man with a violent past, a disturbing pattern, and an unsettling proximity to the scene of one of the world's most haunting disappearances. Christian Bruckner. In June 2020, German authorities publicly named Bruckner as the prime suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. He was not just a figure of interest. He was a convicted rapist, a repeat offender with a documented history of child sexual abuse. And crucially, he was living just minutes away from the McCann's vacation apartment at the time Madeleine vanished. Bruckner's criminal record spans decades and borders. Born in Germany in 1976, he spent much of his early life in and out of youth institutions and later prison. His crimes ranged from theft to drug trafficking, but his most disturbing offenses were of a sexual nature. In 2005, just 2 years before Madeleine's disappearance, he brutally raped a 72-year-old American woman in her own home in Praia da Luz, the same Portuguese resort town where the McCanns were staying. The assault was violent and sadistic. He tied her up, beat her, and recorded parts of the ordeal. For years, the case remained unsolved. Only later, through advances in DNA technology, would Bruckner be convicted and sentenced to 7 years in prison for that crime. By the spring of 2007, Bruckner was living in a dilapidated camper van in the Algarve region. He had no fixed address. He made money through odd jobs, petty theft, and drug dealing. But he was also known for something more sinister: his obsession with young girls. He had been convicted in Germany for sexually abusing a child, and investigators believed he continued to engage in child exploitation activities while living in Portugal. The most damning detail came not from witness testimony or physical evidence, but from digital forensics. On the evening of May 3, 2007, the night Madeleine went missing, Bruckner received a phone call on a prepaid mobile phone. The call was placed at 7:32 p.m., and the tower that received it was located just a few hundred meters from the Ocean Club Resort. He was in the area. He had no alibi. And he turned his phone off immediately after the call ended. Years later, during a search of a former property Bruckner had rented in Germany, police made a gruesome discovery. Beneath the dead body of his dog, buried in the yard, they found a plastic bag. Inside, over 8,000 images and videos of child sexual abuse. Many were graphic. Some featured infants. The material was hidden deliberately, sealed, buried, and shielded beneath a rotting corpse. If this wasn't the behavior of a predator, what was? Still, despite these deeply disturbing findings, no charges related to Madeleine's case have been filed against Bruckner. German authorities have been vocal about their belief in his guilt. Prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters has repeatedly stated that they have concrete evidence linking him to Madeleine's disappearance. But when pressed, Wolters clarified, "We have concrete evidence, not proof." It was a sentence that stunned the public and infuriated the McCanns. What exactly did that mean? So far, the German team has declined to reveal the nature of this evidence. Is it forensic? A confession? A credible witness? That remains unclear. What is known is that Bruckner remains imprisoned in Germany for unrelated crimes. And unless new charges are brought soon, he could be eligible for release as early as 2026. For supporters of this theory, the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. Bruckner fits the profile. He had access. He was in the area. He had the motive, the means, and the history. He used burner phones. He lived out of a van. He had a record of breaking into homes, including through windows and unlocked doors, just like the patio door of apartment 5A. And he had already assaulted a woman in the same town 2 years earlier. The timeline also aligns disturbingly well. The McCanns left their children sleeping around 8:30 p.m. The group's dinner continued with routine checks. Bruckner's suspicious call occurred at 7:32 p.m., leaving ample time for him to act, either alone or with help, before Madeleine was discovered missing at 10 p.m. And yet, for all this alignment, the predator theory has one fatal flaw. There is no direct evidence tying Bruckner to Madeleine. No DNA, no fingerprints, no eyewitness placing him at the Ocean Club that night. No physical trace that she was ever in his van, his home, or his presence. He has never confessed. In fact, he has publicly denied involvement, accusing German prosecutors of a smear campaign. Some investigators have questioned why, if Bruckner was indeed guilty, he would stay in the area for years after the crime. Others point to the lack of any ransom demand, or follow-up communication, often present in stranger abductions, as evidence against the theory. And then there is the forensic failure. Despite extensive searches of his former properties, no material evidence of Madeleine has ever been recovered. Still, the idea of a lone predator remains disturbingly plausible. Praia da Luz in 2007 was not heavily surveilled. There were no CCTV cameras at the entrance to apartment 5A, no license plate recognition systems, no security patrols, and Madeleine's bedroom window faced a quiet pedestrian alley, easy to access, easy to vanish from. To someone experienced in stealth, it may have taken no more than a minute. In this theory, the horror isn't in the complexity, it's in the silence. A man like Christian Bruckner, operating alone, could have taken Madeleine without a sound, disappeared into the night, and erased every trace. The fact that no one saw anything, that nothing was heard, may not be a gap in the theory, but its cruelest proof. The predator theory is the one German prosecutors have staked their reputations on. It is the one that has received the most funding, the most attention, and the most international cooperation in recent years. But it is also the one most frustrating in its lack of closure. Because until someone talks, until some fragment of undeniable truth emerges, Bruckner remains, legally, just a suspect. Not charged, not convicted, just a man with a monstrous past, living in the shadow of a missing child. What if Madeleine McCann wasn't killed? What if she wasn't the victim of a panicked thief or a lone predator, but instead taken with purpose, by a network that knew exactly what they were doing? Among the many theories surrounding her disappearance, the human trafficking theory is one of the most unsettling. Not because it is gruesome, but because it is quiet, calculated, and terrifyingly efficient. It proposes that Madeleine wasn't just a target of opportunity, she was a commodity. A child selected, taken, and transported by people who had done it before, and knew how to leave nothing behind. Praia da Luz, the coastal Portuguese town where the McCanns were vacationing, was the perfect gateway. Nestled on the southwestern tip of Europe, it offered easy access to Spain, France, and North Africa. A child could be across the Spanish border within 90 minutes, on a ferry to Morocco in under 4 hours, or traveling along the highways of Western Europe before daylight. In 2007, there were no advanced border alerts, no widespread child trafficking watch lists, and no integrated systems across countries to flag unusual movements. For traffickers, the Algarve was not just a resort, it was a launch pad. Madeleine, heartbreakingly, fit what traffickers might call a high-value profile. She was young, white, with blonde hair and large blue eyes. Features considered, marketable. In the most disturbing corners of illegal adoption rings, exploitation networks, and even black market surrogacy scams. In a system that commodifies children, appearance matters. And Madeleine's appearance, age, and British nationality made her rare and, tragically, desirable. What adds weight to this theory is how the abduction appeared to unfold. There was no broken window, no sign of forced entry, no loud noises. Her siblings remained undisturbed. Her stuffed toy was left untouched. The apartment showed no signs of a struggle. If someone took her, they did so silently, precisely, and without leaving a trace. That kind of execution doesn't resemble chaos, it suggests planning. It suggests someone who knew the family's schedule, who had observed their routine, and who waited for the right moment. In the days leading up to Madeleine's disappearance, there were multiple reports from other guests and staff about unfamiliar men loitering near the Ocean Club resort. Some were seen watching children, others allegedly taking photos by the pool, even though they had no children with them. These individuals were never properly identified or investigated at the time. Portuguese police focused early on the theory that the McCanns themselves were responsible, deprioritized these leads, and by the time international authorities became involved, the trail had gone cold. Supporters of the trafficking theory argue that these warning signs were classic pre-abduction behavior: surveillance, photographing targets, identifying vulnerabilities, and it all lined up. The McCanns ate dinner at the same restaurant every night, leaving their children alone but checking in regularly. The patio door was left unlocked for ease of access. If someone was watching and waiting, they would have seen a pattern, a window of time, an opportunity. One reason this theory hasn't gained wider public traction is that no forged documents have ever surfaced, no fake passports, no unusual border activity linked to Madeleine's case. But that, in itself, doesn't disprove the theory. Professional trafficking networks often operate with clean papers, corrupt insiders, or routes that bypass formal systems entirely. In some cases, children are moved through unofficial borders, on fishing boats, in delivery trucks, or under false identities that no longer resemble their original appearance. The absence of a forged passport doesn't negate the possibility. It may simply reflect the skill of the perpetrators. Unlike other theories, trafficking doesn't require chaos or violence. It doesn't leave behind evidence. That's part of what makes it so frightening. The theory operates on the belief that Madeleine was taken, hidden, and absorbed into a system that's been operating quietly for years, a system that profits from secrecy and thrives in places where enforcement is fragmented or under-resourced. There have been real cases that lend it credibility. In other parts of Europe, children have been taken from parks, markets, and even hospitals, only to be found years later in completely different countries. Sometimes with families who claim to have adopted them legally, other times working in exploitative conditions. The story of Carlina White, abducted from a New York hospital and raised under a false identity for over 20 years, is a chilling reminder that such disappearances can stretch for decades. Of course, there are critical gaps in the trafficking theory as it relates to Madeleine. No ransom note, no digital trail, no photos surfaced in illegal online forums, no whistleblower from inside a trafficking ring has ever come forward with her name. 18 years later, not a single trace of her has emerged. That level of disappearance suggests either an operation so skilled it left no fingerprints, or that Madeleine's fate lies elsewhere entirely. But for many investigators and followers of the case, the silence surrounding her disappearance remains one of the theory's strongest pieces of circumstantial evidence. Because if Madeleine had been killed, there likely would have been something: blood, a scream, a witness. But if she was taken to be hidden, to be repurposed into another life, then maybe the silence was the point. The human trafficking theory does not comfort. It does not offer hope or closure. What it offers is a possibility, one that is organized, international, and chillingly real. And as long as Madeleine McCann remains unfound, this possibility cannot be ruled out. Not all crimes are committed for money. Not all kidnappings are driven by sexual desire or human trafficking networks. Some are darker in a more personal, more human way. They come from hatred, from resentment, from a need to punish. Among the many theories surrounding the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, one stands apart in its emotional weight: the theory that she wasn't taken for who she was, but for who her parents were. The personal revenge theory asks a disturbing question. What if Madeleine wasn't the target? What if she was collateral? In this version of events, someone harbored a deep grudge against Kate and Jerry McCann. Not a stranger, not a random predator, but someone from their past. A former patient, a disgruntled colleague, someone who felt wronged, justified or not, and chose the most devastating way to get even. Not by confronting them, not by sending threats, but by silently destroying the thing they loved most. There was no ransom note, no demand for money, no taunting phone calls or cryptic letters. There was no communication at all. And that, some argue, is the very proof of motive. If someone took Madeleine not for gain, but for vengeance, then silence was the goal. Not attention, not negotiation, just a clean, untraceable strike. Kate and Jerry McCann were both medical professionals. Jerry a cardiologist, Kate a general practitioner. In their line of work, they interacted with thousands of people. Not all those encounters were positive. Some patients might have received bad news. Others might have perceived neglect, or carried long-standing resentment. Medical errors, even when imagined, can leave emotional scars. Add mental instability into the mix, and it's not unthinkable that someone, somewhere, decided to retaliate, not directly, but through the most untraceable method possible. What makes this theory particularly chilling is how well it fits the circumstances. The disappearance of Madeleine was surgical. There was no sign of forced entry. No one heard anything. Her siblings were untouched. Her toy left on the bed. The crime scene was silent. There was no signature of chaos, no desire for recognition. This wasn't the work of someone looking to make headlines. It was the work of someone who wanted to vanish. Jane Tanner's 9:15 p.m. sighting of a man carrying a child adds an eerie layer. The man wasn't running. He didn't appear to be in a hurry. He walked calmly, cradling the child, with no urgency. If this sighting was real, the calm demeanor of the man could suggest familiarity. Not a desperate criminal fleeing the scene, but someone who knew what they were doing. Someone who wasn't afraid of being seen, because they knew they wouldn't be recognized. Or worse, because they had planned every step. There were reports, largely overlooked in the early days, of strange men seen loitering near the Ocean Club in the days before Madeleine disappeared. Some were described as taking photographs. others simply watching children from a distance. Resort staff also recalled suspicious behavior from temporary workers or service personnel. But no one followed up. The early investigation, locked into the theory that the parents were responsible, failed to explore the idea of a familiar threat, someone who might have blended in, known the area, or had inside knowledge of the McCann's routine. Critics of this theory point to its lack of evidence. No fingerprints, no DNA, no threats, no history of harassment, nothing to suggest the McCanns were being targeted by someone from their past. But perhaps that is the very nature of the crime. Revenge, when carried out with discipline, leaves nothing behind. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand credit. It only seeks to hurt and then disappear. This theory also fits the psychological profile of certain offenders. Individuals who lash out not for gain, but to inflict symbolic damage. To destroy what someone else values most. Madeleine, in this case, was not chosen for who she was. She was chosen for who she represented. Could such a person truly have entered the McCanns' unlocked apartment, taken a child, and escaped without leaving a trace? It sounds impossible. And yet, it happened. Whether it was a trafficker, a predator, or someone with a deeply personal motive, someone did it. And they have never been caught. The personal revenge theory may never be provable. There is no name, no suspect, no confession. But what it offers is a chillingly logical motive in a case that defies logic. A reason rooted not in greed or deviance, but in cold, quiet rage. And that, in many ways, is the most terrifying motive of all. The search for Madeleine McCann has become one of the most expansive, expensive, and ultimately exhausting criminal investigations of the 21st century. But despite thousands of pages of files, over a dozen suspects, and international attention that stretched across continents, the truth remains out of reach. One of the most painful aspects of the case is not just the lack of answers, but the sense that the investigation lost its way long ago. Theories are natural in any unresolved mystery. But in Madeleine's case, they didn't just compete, they collided. From the very beginning, media coverage turned the disappearance into a global spectacle. Every photo of the McCanns, every leaked statement, every rumored sighting was magnified, debated, and distorted. Mainstream outlets, tabloids, and online forums each spun their own narratives, some with compassion, others with suspicion, and many with blatant misinformation. The noise overwhelmed the signal. Soon, the focus shifted from the child to the narrative. Was this the work of a predator, a trafficking ring, a panic driver, or, more darkly, the parents themselves? Each theory attracted its own defenders and critics. The public divided into camps, and with each new headline, objectivity eroded. Investigators weren't just chasing leads, they were battling public opinion. And while the world argued, the investigation fractured. 3 countries took primary responsibility for the case: Portugal, where the crime occurred, the United Kingdom, home of the victim, and Germany, which later identified a prime suspect. But instead of unifying, the effort splintered. Each nation brought its own priorities, its own systems, and its own assumptions. Portuguese police focused early suspicion on the parents, a move that strained cooperation with the British. The UK's Operation Grange, launched years later, concentrated heavily on the possibility of abduction by a stranger. Meanwhile, German authorities, much later, pursued Christian Bruckner as a sexual predator, claiming to have concrete evidence, but still no prosecution. 3 countries, 3 directions, no resolution. Along the way, critical opportunities were lost, many in the very first hours. The crime scene at apartment 5A was not sealed properly. No forensic perimeter was established. Guests and staff walked freely through the room. Fingerprints and trace evidence were likely destroyed before they were ever collected. No full list of who entered and exited the apartment was created that night. Then came the missed chances beyond the walls. No roadblocks were set up. No security camera footage from nearby roads, businesses, or gas stations was collected in time. Vehicle registrations weren't checked with known offenders in the area. No immediate inspection of rental cars or vans in the vicinity took place. Airports and ferry terminals were not placed on high alert. The border was never closed, not even temporarily, and a full review of resort guest lists, including false identities or duplicate names, wasn't conducted until years later, if at all. What should have been standard operating procedure was delayed, or simply ignored. It's the kind of list that keeps investigators awake at night, not because of what was done, but because of what wasn't. The questions are haunting. What might have been discovered if cell tower data was pulled on May 4? What could have been found if every guest was interviewed before departure? If every car in the resort parking lot was logged? If every cleaning staff member was vetted? If the early hours were treated like a genuine crime scene and not a missing person case? The trail didn't go cold on its own. It was allowed to. Part of the blame lies in the case's complexity. It involved a child, foreign jurisdictions, high-level political pressure, and unprecedented public scrutiny. The Portuguese police, under-equipped and overexposed, were overwhelmed. The British media, desperate for updates, fueled rumors and speculation, often undermining real leads. And when the German authorities entered the picture years later, their own legal limitations prevented key evidence from being shared or acted upon. But more than anything, the case was paralyzed by indecision. When an investigation follows too many paths at once, it rarely reaches the end of any of them. And in this case, each theory, each possibility, pulled resources, attention, and energy in a different direction. Instead of building toward truth, the investigation collapsed under the weight of options. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann is not just a story about a lost child. It is a story about missed steps, miscommunication, and misalignment. A tragedy not only in what happened, but in what didn't happen. And in the void left behind, theories flourish. Suspicions persist. But the answers, whatever they are, remain locked behind doors that should have been opened long ago. 18 years have passed since the night Madeleine McCann vanished from apartment 5A in Praia da Luz. 18 years of press conferences, police statements, excavations, and speculation. And yet, the most important fact remains unchanged: she is still missing. But after nearly 2 decades, it's no longer just Madeleine that's missing. It's something deeper, something harder to name. The sense of progress, of resolution, of direction. What we are left with is a void, not just of presence, but of answers. The British Metropolitan Police, through Operation Grange, still officially list Madeleine's status as missing. For them, there is still a possibility, however slim, that she is alive. That one day, the right tip will come. That someone, somewhere, will remember something that breaks the case open. They continue to receive public funding, though the scope of the investigation has narrowed dramatically over time. In Germany, however, the tone is far more final. Prosecutors believe Madeleine is dead. They have said so publicly, without hesitation, and their prime suspect remains Christian Bruckner, a convicted sex offender who lived near the Ocean Club in 2007 and has a long history of crimes against women and children. Yet even with that certainty, they've filed no charges. Why? Because, as lead prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters put it, we have concrete evidence. Not proof. It's a statement that says everything and nothing. It implies confidence, but not closure. It confirms suspicion, but not guilt. It's the kind of phrase that leaves the public hanging in purgatory and the family trapped between hope and despair. In May 2023, under German direction, Portuguese authorities conducted a high-profile search at the Arade Dam, an isolated site roughly 50 kilometers from Praia da Luz. The location was allegedly connected to Bruckner, who was known to camp nearby. For 3 days, investigators scoured the area with dogs, shovels, sonar equipment, and pumps to drain part of the reservoir. Hopes ran high, but when the operation ended, the official report was underwhelming: no significant human remains, only fragments, later identified as animal bones. In June 2025, a second search followed, this time near a derelict property linked to Bruckner's former associates. Once again, investigators uncovered bones and torn fabric. Once again, Nothing conclusive. No DNA, no body, no closure. And now, the clock is ticking louder than ever. Bruckner, who is currently serving time in Germany for unrelated crimes, could be released as early as late 2025. Without new charges, he will walk free. No matter how many investigators believe he is guilty, unless a court sees evidence beyond reasonable doubt, he remains in the eyes of the law an uncharged suspect. A man with rights. A man with time. The McCanns, meanwhile, have endured the unendurable. Year after year, they've stayed in the public eye, not to hold on to fame, but to hold on to their daughter's name. Kate and Jerry McCann have faced media storms, baseless accusations, public judgment, and unbearable personal grief. And still they keep going. They mark anniversaries. They issue statements. They continue to believe. 18 years is a lifetime. Madeleine would be 22 years old now. The world has moved on in many ways. Technology has evolved. Investigative tools have improved. Social media has changed how missing persons cases are shared. And yet, despite all of that, despite dogs, drones, forensics, and international cooperation, this case remains suspended in stillness. There is no confession, no witness, no confirmed sighting, no grave, and that absence, the utter lack of any physical or emotional resolution, is what makes this case more than just a tragedy. It makes it a symbol. Madeleine McCann's disappearance is no longer only about a child. It is about how, in a world overflowing with data, surveillance, and global networks, a little girl can vanish without a trace, and how the systems meant to protect her, police, borders, laws, can grind to a halt when faced with uncertainty. She is still missing, people say, but maybe something else is too. Certainty, justice, faith in the institutions that promised to bring her home. And yet, even in the face of that silence, the McCanns refuse to stop looking. And that may be the one thing in this case more powerful than all the doubt and confusion, a hope that refuses to die. Because until someone speaks, until something breaks, this void will remain. And so will the question that still echoes after 18 years. 18 years have passed. Dozens of suspects, hundreds of witness statements, thousands of pages of files, millions of dollars in public funding. And yet, the one question that matters most remains unanswered. Where is Madeleine? It is the question that no one, no detective, no forensic expert, no journalist, has been able to answer. It lingers in every documentary, every article, every late-night discussion about the case. It echoes not only through the corridors of police stations, but through the minds of people who never knew her. Because Madeleine McCann's disappearance is no longer just a case. It's a symbol. No one has ever been convicted. No trial has ever taken place. There is no definitive theory, no confirmed motive, no single piece of evidence that closes the loop. There is no body. There is no grave. There is no confession. And so, there is no truth, only speculation, and a silence that speaks louder with each passing year. Madeleine's name is now synonymous with the unimaginable. She has become the face of every missing child, the poster for what happens when systems fail, when moments are missed, and when justice moves too slowly to matter. She is a reminder that not every story ends, that not every family gets closure, that not every crime gets solved. And yet, she was never supposed to be a symbol. She was just a little girl on vacation. Blonde hair, blue eyes, a small brown fleck in her iris, a big sister, a daughter, a child who loved to laugh and cuddle and run through the sun, a child who was meant to grow up, go to school, fall in love, live a life. Instead, she became a question. How does a child disappear without a trace? It's the kind of question that shakes our belief in order and safety. In a world of GPS tracking, surveillance cameras, border control, and international cooperation, how is it possible that one small girl could vanish and never be found? If it could happen to Madeleine, on a family trip, in a quiet resort town, with the world watching, could it happen to anyone? The pain of this case is not just in its cruelty, but in its emptiness, the lack of answers, the absence of resolution, and the growing fear that maybe, after all these years, there never will be one. That whoever knows the truth has either taken it to their grave, or simply chosen never to speak. But even in the silence, one thing endures the question. Not because it brings hope, but because forgetting it would mean giving up. And for the McCanns, for the millions who followed every headline, every search, every whisper, giving up is not an option. Whereas Madeleine McCann, we still don't know. And until we do, this case will never really close. Not in the courts, not in the media, not in our hearts.